all of you on the East Coast, and good morning if you're on the West Coast. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Beware of Bigfoot, Appreciating Donor Differences. My name is Stephen Shattuck, and I'm the VP of Marketing here at Bloomerang, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. And I'm joined today all the way from the beautiful state of Idaho, my new friend, Larry C. Johnson. Hey there, Larry.
Good morning, or afternoon, as the case may be.
Yeah, good morning to you. Thanks for joining us today. And for those of you who don't know Larry, Larry is the author of the award-winning book, The 8 Principles of Sustainable Fundraising. The Association of Fundraising Professionals has named Larry the Outstanding Development Executive in 2010, and the Wall Street Business Network ranks him in the top 30 fundraising consultants in the United States. And with 25 years of experience in professional philanthropy, Larry has worked with the leaders of hundreds of nonprofit organizations and philanthropists seeking to improve the lives of those around them. So this is just a real treat to have you with us, Larry, to share all of your knowledge. So thanks again for taking an hour or so out of your day.
It is my pleasure, Steve.
So what we're going to do today is Larry's got a great presentation for all of you. He's going to talk about creating sustainability and scalability in fundraising, and a little bit about Bigfoot as well. I know you're all excited about what Bigfoot has to do with all of this. So Larry's going to roll through his presentation, and then when he's done, we will jump right into an interactive question and answer session, as we always do on these Bloomerang webinars. So as you're listening to Larry, please don't be shy about sending any questions or comments through that chat window right there on your screen. And I'll see those, and Larry will see those, and I'll be pitching those questions to Larry a little bit later on. So don't be shy, send any questions or comments your way, and we'll try to answer as many questions as we can within this 1 o'clock segment. And as always, I will be sending out the slides and a recording of this presentation for you to reference later. So don't be too worried if maybe you miss a tidbit or don't see a slide for as long as maybe you wanted. We will be sending all those materials out a little later this afternoon. So I'm not going to waste any more time. Larry, I'm going to hand it off to you. So take it away.
Well, thank you. I just want to reinforce what Steve said. We're going to go through the slides fairly rapidly. I don't want to spend a lot of time just talking. And once we have done that, probably in about 20-25 minutes, I would like to have a pretty open and engaged question and answer session. That's where we often find out what's really on people's minds and be able to relate content to them that works for them. And that is one of the things that I feel very, very strongly about, is that sustainable philanthropic revenue is possible for any nonprofit, regardless of their size, and I stand by that assertion. So with that being said, we're going to be looking at just a small wedge of what I call the 8 principles today, but it's focused on something that I think may relate directly to how you use your CRM system. So let's get started. Okay, here, I'm learning to use this. Bigfoot. Bigfoot is a prehistoric mythic creature said to roam the forest of North America, and I think it's similar to the average donor. You know, we all hear about the average donor, that person that sort of meets all the medians and the means and the normals, and we often pitch our appeals to that person. And yet, does that person really exist? Are they really out there? Well, I would assert that they're not. They don't exist. But yet, the way a lot of fundraising programs are built, either by design or by default, they assume that. It's in the background. It's there. We're going to make this grand appeal to everyone in the same way, in the same manner, in the same timing, with the same content. So where's this disconnect? If people don't believe that they're really out there, why do they go ahead and continue to do it the same way? Well, we'll try to answer that question a little bit. Whether we acknowledge them or even are aware of them, I'm going to assert to you that they're timeless principles that act upon all fundraising efforts, for good or for ill. And let's talk about what principles are for a moment. They are timeless, they are unchanging, and you either work with them or you work against them. And what I've sort of quantified these, and I call them the 8 principles of sustainable fundraising. It's also the title of my book. And so I say that there are 8 of these. You may be able to name some more, but I think I've covered the waterfront pretty well with these. that whether we know it or whether we are even aware of it, these are things that are operating in the background, much like gravity. We're all subject to gravity. If we go and throw ourselves off a 3-story building, unless we have some aids, we're not going to fly. And so it's best if we behave ourselves in a manner that will work with gravity, will work with some of these principles rather than against them. And yet we often don't start or really begin to understand what they are. We're so focused on process. Every day in my mailbox are, this technique, this software, that tool, do this, do that. It's the latest and greatest silver bullet. And yet that's not the right place to begin if you're looking to build a program that is sustainable over time and one that really scales to anything close to your true potential. You need first to understand what are the sort of laws of fundraising that are operating in the background. And then once you've done that, begin to form, and we're not going to talk about it today necessarily, but begin to form what I call the paradigm, the mental construct that works for your organization. And this is where it becomes organizationally specific, that is within these principles. And once you've done that, and that's the hard part, that's the work, then choosing the right tools, choosing the right techniques, choosing the right approaches, even choosing the right calendar is going to be almost a no-brainer. So don't start with process, let's start at the principle end. And so, as I said earlier, a principle is universal, it's timeless, it's often self-evident, it's external to us. We don't control it. We don't have any impact on it. It's just there. And it's in effect whether we're even aware of it or whether we agree with it. It's the way it is. And these sort of things have predictable outcomes. You know that it's going to do certain things because of the way it is, just like I mentioned with gravity a few minutes ago. One-size-fits-all fund development programs spring from a lack of awareness and appreciation of one of these principles. And that one we're going to talk about today is what I call Principle 6, Divide and Grow. All right? And what is Principle 6 all about? Let's just talk about that for a minute. Divide and Grow essentially says, and we'll come back to it at the end, that you treat different donors differently. And that sounds pretty commonsensical. Well, these things are not rocket science, but yet they're often ignored. So divide and grow, number one, your constituency divides, your donor constituency divides or segments itself, and I use the fundraising term there, according to a couple of things, ability and affinity. Ability is financial ability, is what I'm referring to. Affinity is the values or linkage to your organization. Those two things working together will determine how you should be treating your donors if, what is our presupposition? Our presupposition is if you want to build a program that sustains itself and scales, you need to work understanding that this is happening even if you're not aware of it. So you want to work with donor behavior, not against it. This is something that when I work with clients, it's often very difficult for them they understand it, but acting upon it is tough. And the reason for that is simply that they're so driven to do the good things that they want to do, they become what I call program rather than purpose-driven organizations. They're so focused on delivering that they sort of project out to their donors, here's what we're doing, here's the way we're doing it, this is what I want you to support, ABC. Effective, sustainable fundraising is the reverse of that paradigm. It is inviting donors whom you already have some affinity with and who have some level of ability to share your vision, and together you solve the challenge. Now, it's more than words, because you're really inviting them in. So you're not projecting out, you're inviting them in, and they will, by virtue of their involvement with the organization, both temporally and financially, influence the way the organization delivers on its mission. That's the key, because they're the investors. They're the ones who are driving this, and that's another one of the principles. Donors are the drivers, in which we're not going to get into today. But the idea is to work with those donors and work with the behavior. Now let's look at one other concept here. There are really 4 building blocks to any scalable program. You have to acquire new donors, and there was some cutesy animations on these slides, but unfortunately the software we're using has taken those out, so you won't get the benefit of those. But when I say these, imagine these words are going to pop out at you a little bit. You have to acquire new donors. You have to retain as many of those as you can. And this is a particularly sore spot in today's fundraising climate because donor retention rates have been dropping pretty dramatically over the past decade. And we can talk about what some reasons are or why that's happening. You need to progress donors. And what I'm saying here are two kinds of progression. Progressing them through their own lifetime of giving to you, because if you're retaining them, they're going to give over a period of time. And then also progressing them toward their natural top giving potential. Even if a person is capable of writing a 5-figure check for you, they're not going to do that first off. Very rarely will that happen. And so you have to move them to that point, and there are ways of doing that. And the last thing, and this is involved when you have all these competing sorts of fundraising vehicles and programs and plans, where sometimes if they're not coordinated with one another, they actually work against each other. They actually work to reduce what you're raising. And people think, oh, well, if we just go and do all these things, all these 6 or 7 different things independent of each other, we'll raise more money. Well, nothing could be farther from the truth. Because remember, we're looking at engaging people on 2 levels, on their ability to give and their affinity, which is their value linkage. And we need to know both of those things. So any program that scales and is sustainable will have these building blocks built into it somewhere. And that is something that acquires donors that's specifically designed to do just that, something that's designed to retain those donors at a highest rate as possible. You can't retain 100%. People die, people go away, people change their interests. Something that is designed to deliberately progress donors, both in terms of giving size, but also in terms of where they are in their life. And then fourth, something that overarchingly coordinates all the things that you're doing so you're not working at cross purposes. Let's look at a chart here that I think may be illustrative. This is what I call the donor progression pipeline. And the donors enter from the left side of this chart, and they move over time to the right-hand side. And you just look at that. At the left-hand side, they come in as brand new donors. They're acquired that way. And as you can see, there's generally 3 ways of getting there: direct mail, email, telephone. You could also say face-to-face visit, although generally that's not the case. Although I will say that the most effective, meaning the highest rates of success and the highest level of giving kind of approach, is a face-to-face approach. But given the numbers, given the resources, it's impossible to approach everyone that way. So once a donor is acquired, they come in there. You'll notice that there are lots of those little arrows, those dotted arrows. That's a cost to revenue proportion. So it's very expensive to acquire new donors. In fact, the acquisition programs of nonprofits who have fairly mature fundraising programs, they consider that program to be a success if it's simply covering its cost, that they're not really even making any money per se out of it, because what they're really looking for there is to bring new donors into the fold, because they know that further down that pipeline is where the donors grow and where they begin to contribute in a real meaningful and substantial way financially. So the next thing is you have your donor progression and retention. This is a lot where you have your high cash-in giving, your face-to-face direct asks for 5-figure cash gifts. From that, you get what are often called major gifts. Now, let me be specific about that. People use that term very loosely. I use it very specifically. Often people say a major gift is a major gift, and I'm using this. How's that working, Steve? Pretty good?
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Okay, all right. Okay, I'm kind of working with this. They think it's major simply because of the size. All right, well, size is relative. Some organizations, a major gift is $10,000. My alma mater, a major gift is 7 figures. So it depends. That's a relative term. But for me, a major gift is a gift that's out of the donor's assets, whatever they might be. So then you're looking at all different levels. Why do I say that? In this area right here, you're looking at gifts of income. Gifts of income. People can write a check for these things, even if it's a multiple year ask. They're writing a check out of income. Here, you're looking at gifts that are out of assets, accumulated assets, either money in the bank, appreciated securities, real estate, anything that has some sort of capital value. And this is the reason I call it major gifts, is because this requires a higher level of emotional commitment by the donor. Donors will write you checks all day long, even at a fairly substantial rate. When you start getting gifts that represent part of their accumulated capital, you've moved up the scale in terms of their commitment to you as a donor. And this is, of course, where you want to move to. And then then these are usually, of course, done face-to-face, and they're cultivated over time before they ask. And then here you have this wonderful thing that we all know is planned giving, which I would simply say to you is simply a subset of this kind of giving, major giving. And that's because they still are gifts out of assets. The difference being is they're given in some deferred manner, or they're given with some sort of secondary criteria that is not related directly to the nonprofit. But the motivation remains basically the same. And you get a face-to-face negotiated ask. And I say negotiated because I said there's these other criteria that usually come in here. And then you see here that you have this stewardship cycle. You have to constantly be moving people back through this pipeline. And for those of you who have, for those of that represent organizations that have lots of what I would call modest but regular givers, this area of giving represents a real opportunity for you. That is, if you are watching. If a person's giving regular cash gifts at a fairly modest level, then oftentimes this is a place where a person can make a deferred or conditional gift either upon their death or upon a trust or an annuity, because they can only do it once. And they're giving you then a big chunk of what their accumulated assets are. So don't let this fool you if the person's giving you $30, $40, $50 a month for 30 years. In fact, for me, the largest deferred gift I've ever personally negotiated was about $3 million from, of all people, a single, unmarried, public school librarian, a spinster lady. And she had given $35, $40 to an organization for over 40 years. And then she made this gift through very careful investing. And she, of course, she doesn't fit the profile of what you'd call a typical major donor. And then you see here this line at the bottom here. This is what this is the accelerator line, I call it, or the turbo line. This is capital campaigns. You know, capital campaigns are designed to raise capital gifts for specific purposes. However, what universities discovered a couple of decades ago was they also have a very important secondary, if not more important, benefit. And that is, what's been noted is if you have a successful capital campaign and you manage it appropriately, you're going to have a halo effect in terms of elevated overall giving from that campaign, at least 5, 10, even 15 years out from the pledge period. So that's why you see what universities have gone to. They call this the continual campaign, so that you're not either staffing up, doing a campaign and going away. You're always in some phase of campaign management, either planning, executing, or collecting, and then you're just back into that cycle again. So this is where you can really also raise the overall level of your giving. Now let's look at the next slide here. One thing that's very important when you begin to develop your fundraising program is that you have the right business model. Let's look at retail groceries, for instance. The retail grocery market, it depends on a couple of things. It depends on very high volume. It is very price sensitive. And for it to work, that volume must be there and the margin must be just enough. And there's not a lot of loyalty there either, by the way. You know, if the supermarket down the street can undercut the price a little bit, people will go there. Now, if you think about that for a minute, that looks a lot like a type of fundraising that we're all in love with. And that's what I call transactional fundraising, and you see it in its manifestation in the fundraising event, the gala, when you buy and sell things, where there's a material exchange. It's a very high cost way to raise money. There's no renewability. It's very price sensitive. And the other thing about that is it doesn't scale. It's very difficult to get, let's go back to why people give through ability and affinity. It's very difficult to get people progressed up to a higher level of ability because you're treating people all the same, or at least at some middle level. Now let's look at the aircraft model. The airframe business, Boeing, McDonnell Douglas, Lockheed, these people, they build a product that has about a 20-year or 2-decade lifespan. And it's a very expensive product. It's a high price going in, but it's a very long-lasting product. Now, when I first got my start when I got out of school, I worked for Westinghouse in large-scale transit projects. And it was very similar to aircraft in that you had a long-term, high-cost product with a long lifespan. It was a very custom design product. When Boeing designs a new airframe, they have been working on it for years. They have poured a lot of money into it up front. Some would say they even bet the company to develop a new airplane every time they do it. So when they begin to take orders for those planes and they begin to deliver them, all they're doing for much of the time is simply recovering their cost. That's all they're doing. In other words, they've done all this work to acquire donors, and so now they're beginning to recover some of that cost. So you say, okay, so where's the payoff? Well, the payoff from a financial point of view, if you have maintained relations with your customer, or in this case your donor, is that when that customer comes back to look for renewal parts, and there are lots of renewal parts that constantly have to be replaced on these airframes, they're going to come to you. They're not going to go to the aftermarket. And that renewal part is a standard inventoriable item that has very low overhead. And so that's where you retain your margin. And in the same way, in fundraising programs that are built on a longer-term cycle, like the aircraft business, where you're looking at a 3 to 5 year overall cycle, this is where the cash generation comes. So, and that's very difficult for a lot of nonprofits because they're so focused on current use cash that they cannot break away from that insidious cycle. It's like running in a bicycle in low gear. They're going down the street, but they're expending a lot of effort getting there. And if they let up even for a minute, they're going to lose serious momentum. So this is what I invite you to think about, the difference between groceries and aircraft. And this is something you have to sell to your boards to approach it differently. We can talk about that. There's a lot to unpack here. Let's see here. Okay. So the foundational principle of divide and grow is structuring fundraising efforts around the natural divisions of your donor base. In other words, and how do they divide themselves? By both giving capacity and giving affinity. What relationship do they have? What affinity do they have to your values? That's how you need to structure your program. That's essential for maximizing your growth. Not that you won't raise money other ways. I mean, these other ways that I've suggested all raise money. They do. But we're talking about raising money in a sustainable way that scales over time. Let me give you a comparison of what I'm speaking about. In the last recession, which was pretty bad for everyone, depending on where you were on this continuum, had a lot to do with what your revenue looked like, and from a philanthropic point of view. If you were very steeped in the transactional end of this business, and that's not to say that you never do any of it, but that's where you were focused, that's where you were putting most of your efforts, depending on where you were, you could have seen a drop in income from that source of at least 50%. That's jaw-dropping. On the other hand, if you looked at what happened with growth, with philanthropy that was totally or mostly relationally driven, which is what I'm talking about, net from 07 to 09 was 2% decline. Well, that's something that's manageable. So what are the paradigms of the appropriate mental constructs that you need to be putting in your head as you begin to design a program like this? Well, in general, obviously there are ones that are specific to your organization, but in general, you've got to be concerned about the affinity the donors have to you. This is why it needs to be values-driven, not transactionally driven. You need to know the ability of your donors, and you need donors of all levels. It's not just about deep pockets, because although, as you can see from the 80-20 rule there, it's the larger donors that drive the numbers and overall receipts, it's the smaller donors that also give you the legitimacy that you must have in the larger market to move forward. So it takes all gifts. It's not just about the big guys. However, 80% of what you raise, or 70-30 or 90-10, is going to come from 20 or 10 or 5 or 20% of your donor base. And that's just a given. That's one of those things that's just out there. That's donor behavior. Work with it. You know, I had this has been several years ago now, I had an executive director say to me when I talked to him about this, oh, we believe in the small gift model. I said, well, what's that? Well, we ask, for small amounts from everyone. Well, okay, that's great, but why would you do that when you're often discouraging the very people that would give you larger gifts if you ask them for larger gifts? You don't flatter people by asking them for too little. You flatter them by asking them appropriately for what they're truly capable of giving you. And then, of course, sustainability and scalability do require a long-term focus. And this is where your board becomes either an active contributor or a detractor to this process, is they need to understand how to read their dashboard. You need to be giving them the right variables to evaluate. And current use, cash received in the last quarter is an accounting figure. It's not a fundraising predictor. I mean, my wife's an accountant. It's a financial number, and it's important. Without cash, you're not going to keep the lights open. I couldn't agree more. But in terms of evaluating where your fundraising program is going, how healthy it is, and what its capacity is, and how it's delivering, that is not an effective number. And so we need to get away from that, from looking at it as a fundraising number, because it really isn't. Not if you're looking for the long term. Because if you're doing this long term, the money that came in the last quarter is money that began to be generated 18, 24 months ago. So principle 6 is divide and grow. Achieving scalability in fundraising efforts requires the focus and discipline to treat different donors differently. It sounds easy, but it's tougher when you start doing it and you realize you have to sort of invert the way you've been thinking about this process. It can be a little tougher. And remember, every program, in order for it to scale and be sustainable, has to have components that address each of these 4 pieces. You have to have something that is definitely designed to go out and get new donors. I mean, that's what it's designed to do. This isn't a one-size-fits-all thing. You can't be all things to all people. You have a program that's specifically going to be designed and evaluated based on how well it retains new donors. Do they keep coming back again and again and again? You have to have something that is consciously progressing donors and following them through their lifespans, but also progressing them to their true financial ability. Can you evaluate that? And then lastly, you have to create goals, and this is often where the coordination gets to be competition, where you create goals that coordinate toward a common end. And so the fundraising gala isn't undercutting the annual fund, which is undercutting the special gifts fund, which is undercutting whatever. You see, you're working together, because donors get confused real easily, because they aren't there all the time. All they see is what comes at them, and if you begin to evaluate it on that basis, then you'll begin to see, oh wow, we're competing more than we're coordinating. So what's the role of a CRM system like Bloomerang? Well, and believe me, they did not pay me to say this. I want to make that very clear. When I first got into this business, CRMs were big, hulking pieces of software that ran on large mainframes, were expensive, and only the very large, sophisticated fundraising programs would even think about purchasing such a thing. All right. Then they went to PCs, and then a lot of them are now web-based. And they're a lot less expensive, they're a lot more nimble, and they're very useful, even for very small nonprofits. And what does it do for you? Well, it provides the structural framework for treating donors differently. You can build into your framework of your system for allowing for these kinds of differences. And then it also gives you tools for executing those 4 processes. You can begin to structure your processes, and it'll track those for you. And then, of course, what we want all the systems to do, it will help coordinate them and give you some accountability. You'll know where things are falling apart, or where you need to reinforce, or where things are really succeeding. So that's where a CRM system can be very useful. It is not a silver bullet. In and of itself, it raises no money whatsoever, but it is a very powerful tool if it's used appropriately. And now we're ready for questions.
Well, great. Thanks, Larry. We've got a lot of very positive comments in the chat room, so thanks for that great presentation. I think people really enjoyed that, the pipeline graphic as well. Very good. So jump right into some questions. We had some come over the chat room, and for those of you who are maybe withholding some questions, feel free to send those through the chat as we talk, as we go through these first few questions. Larry is here at your disposal for the next 20 minutes or so, so don't be shy at all. So Larry, we've got a few questions here in the chat room, but I wanted to ask something before we got into that, something that I was wondering, especially as you were showing that pipeline graphic.
Yeah, we can go back to that.
Let's look at that. You know, you've worked with a lot of organizations in your career. You know, you've seen people be successful. Are there any organizations that come to mind that really just nailed this that you've worked with, and maybe what were some of the reasons for that? You know, what were some of the characteristics that made those folks successful?
Well, you know, the two that come to mind are both large, mature organizations. However, let me hasten to issue a qualifier. They didn't start out being large, mature organizations. They got that way by doing these kinds of things consistently over time, again and again and again. And I want to stress that this is, you know, it's like momentum. It's like a locomotive. You build a certain, well, back when they were steam. Okay, am I dating myself or what? All right. So you put enough energy into that boiler, but it takes a long time of inertia of that boiler sitting there before it has enough push to begin to move those pistons in the engine. And once you get over that initial inertia, then you can, by just little increases or maintenance of energy, you're flying down the tracks, you see. And it's that getting to that initial point, that critical mass, that over that standing inertia, where a lot of organizations just go, you know, this isn't working. They're not waiting enough. So to answer your question, the organization that comes to mind immediately that does this extremely well is Habitat for Humanity International.
Oh.
They're very clear about who they are. They're very clear. They know their donor profiles inside and out. They know the affinity and ability answers down to the third place, and have a pipeline just like we're looking at right here, or something very similar to that. Mm-hmm. And as a result, this is a federated charity, so I'm talking about the international organization, not the individual chapters. But the international organization, 70% of their income is generated through individual giving. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
So, and as a result, they have tremendous retention, tremendous throughput, and they have a lot of cash coming in the door.
Right. Well, cool. While we're on this graphic, you mentioned capital campaigns, and we had a few questions in the chat room about capital campaigns. And one of them comes from Lita. And Lita, if I'm mispronouncing your name, I'm so sorry about that. Feel free to. But she was wondering, Larry, what strategies do you have for not losing annual donors through the capital campaign? So I think the concern there is maybe you have an annual donor, you present the capital campaign to them, they give to that, but then they stop renewing afterwards. So how do you keep a hold of those people but still get them to give to that capital campaign and stay in that cycle of yours?
Okay, so I think I heard two questions. Let me make sure. Is the question asking them for an annual gift at the same time you're asking for capital? Or is
I think retaining, yes.
Okay, all right. Well, my experience has been, and of course it's very counterintuitive because you said the concern is blah, 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 blah. My experience has been that if it's positioned correctly, that if people understand what the annual fund is for, and they understand what the capital campaign is for, they will make a rational decision based on their affinity to the organization about where their dollars go. Now, add in the fact that studies at Boston University, or I guess it's Boston College, and at University of Indiana Center for Philanthropy, all demonstrate that philanthropy is an elastic variable. It is not static. So it is not a matter of, if you get yours, I won't get mine. It's a matter of, how do we pick up more of the money that's out there that's being left on the table? And that's really hard for a lot of people to grasp because they just see it as, and part of it's a scarcity mentality. There's just not enough out there. I can't get enough. And my experience has been that it's actually the reverse. But you have to take that step of faith, and you have to be very confident with it. Not that everyone is going to step up and do exactly what I said. Absolutely not. But overall, if you look at the universities, because they are the ones that are probably the most sophisticated with this kind of ask you're talking about, is they've managed very well to maintain or grow annual funds at the same time that they're having capital campaigns. And actually, it's a way, if it's managed appropriately, it's a way to bring new donors into the fold in an annual fund type of giving at the same time that you're running a campaign.
Right. And Lita just said the excitement of the capital campaign is usually more attractive than just being an annual donor. Would you agree with that? I think that makes sense.
Oh, yeah. I mean, people want to be a part of a winner. They want to be a part of an organization that's doing things. Well, let me give you one example of how the demography of philanthropists is changing. When I first got into this business, you never, ever, or I never did, get the outcome and effectiveness types of questions for a gift unless you were dealing with someone who was considering a gift of at least 6 figures. Now, with people under the age of 40 or definitely under the age of 30, they're asking those questions for a gift of $50.
Right.
And this has caught a lot of nonprofits off balance because they don't know quite how to respond to this, mainly because a lot of them are still driven by this program model where I'll give them my program and let me do it and I'll get back to you. Well, that's not going to work with today's philanthropists.
Absolutely.
And so that's, So, excitement. Let's be fun. Let's make it exciting. And because you see, you're really giving donors an opportunity to share in your vision and to realize their own values. That's what you're doing. You're not going with your hand, cap in hand. You're not begging these people. You're not something under duress. At least you shouldn't be, or trying to. You're really giving them an opportunity. And, as you go back, the subtitle of my book is, Eliminating Fundraising Anxiety. If you begin to look at fundraising this way, a lot of the anxiety goes away because you're not really taking, you're actually giving.
Yeah, that's great. So I really love what you said about progression being something you should worry about after retention, and I think that that also piques some people's interest. So regarding your 4 building blocks, and you mentioned that, hey, you're not going to impress anyone by asking for a small gift. And Nancy in the chat room, she was wondering that how do you determine what that top potential gift is? How do you determine what the ceiling is when you're going after a quote-unquote major gift and trying to avoid asking for a small amount?
Well, this is where there is some science to it, but this is also where we get into some of the art of fundraising, that gut feeling. There are lots of services out there that will give you. You can buy lists, you can do marketing screening, you can do asset income screening, and these things are not perfect. They're better than they used to be. They're less expensive than they used to be, but they're not perfect. They're simply sort of rough cuts that sort of begin to break down your donor base. But a lot of that is really fine-tuned when you look at donor behavior. You bring somebody in the door and you ask for what's considered to be an entry-level gift, and depending on where you are and and your general constituency, you're going to know what that is. You're going to know whether it's $50 or $500. You're going to have a sense for that. And so once people start giving at that entry level, the key, of course, is to keep them giving. And one of the things that you need to do is find out why they're giving to you in the first place, which honestly no one ever does. Well, how do you do that? Well, one of the easiest ways to do that is to get on the phone and ask them. They will tell you. And you only have to do a few of these to begin to see a pattern. And then you can begin to know why and how important it is to them. And then based on that, if you see a pattern that they're giving a couple $100 a year, you can begin to progress those at a pretty healthy increment. And you can give them options if you're looking for an annual fund gift. And it's when they get to that 4-figure level in my book that they warrant a face-to-face visit, even if it's for a fairly brief one. And, of course, the other thing I want to say is that you don't want to solicit people too often. That is the number one negative that comes back in all the surveys, is soliciting people too often. And that's why, they often want to be solicited for more but less frequently. But there again, the donors will tell you that if you will ask them. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, that was great. Don't be afraid to ask, right?
Don't be afraid to ask. And the thing is, you're asking them to share in your vision. And if your vision is big enough and expansive enough, but not unreasonable, I mean, we're not talking about pie in the sky and totally, out of bounds, but it is challenging, then they're much more likely to respond favorably. I mean, you're not demanding. You're not buttonholing people. You don't want to push them up against the door so the next time they see you, they cross the street. That's not what we're trying to do here.
Great. Well, Barbara has an interesting question here. She's wondering if you can mix transactional fundraising donors and long-term consistent donors. So I think she's asking, how can you strike that balance between transactional donors and those folks who give long-term?
Well, you need to make sure that they both qualify. And let me respond to that. A lot of people that attend these transactional events, they aren't really donors at all. I call them responders. They're there for some other reason. Their boss told them to go to fill up the table. Somebody invited them. It's a place to network for business. There are all sorts of reasons people show up for those things that have nothing to do with why you're raising the money. So let's put those people off to the side for a minute. And I would also suggest to you that is the bulk of people who come to these things. Number one.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the others, theirs who are there for some sort of mission-based reason, all right, well then you need to make sure that the event is designed in such a way so that it opens the door for more things, that there's follow-up, that it's fun and exciting, but you don't send the message that you're raising great guns of cash here. You can also do it through something called the reverse auction. You're not really selling anything. You're really inviting people to make direct gifts in a top-down sort of way, and that requires some advanced planning. I had a client that was really steeped into this transactional fundraising, and they had one event that people clung to. It was emotional to these people. You didn't dare get rid of this thing. And I said, well, so what are we going to do here? Are we going to and I said, well, here, why don't you do this? Why don't you do a reverse auction? So what we did was we looked at some giving patterns that already existed. We knew some people that were going to be attending this thing because it was a fun thing to do. We went out, and in advance, we created an 80-20 chart like you would for a capital campaign, only at a lower level, and we got a couple of people at each of these levels to agree to make gifts. So that when we got into the event and all the excitement was going, and the auctioneer says, well, can we have a direct gift of $10,000? We had a straight person in the audience that said yes. And it stunned a lot of people. And as a result, they raised, 6 or 8 times more than they ever raised in that event. And it's like 30 or 40-year history. Because there was some pure competition. So a lot of it has to do with, and if you look also, some arts organizations do this very well, where they're really not selling stuff. The premiums or the things, they're simply props. For instance, the value of something may be $1,500 and the bidding starts at $20,000. And so it ceases to be a transaction when you get into that kind of, it's the whole dynamics and psychology of the event have changed.
Great. Well, we've got a question here from Pablo. It sounds like Pablo works in the higher ed sector. And he's got a question about wondering what a good approach is to getting new young donors interested in giving back to their alma mater. Is that a type of organization you work with, Larry? And what kind of tips do you have for getting maybe a new graduate to give back to their school?
Well, that's actually where I had a lot of my experience. I served as Chief Advancement Officer for 4 institutions of higher learning, and this is always an issue. Donor, high alumni participation rates are the coin of the realm. All sorts of ways of doing this. I would suggest to you that if you're serious about improving your numbers there, it starts while these people are in school.
Yeah.
And it starts a couple of ways. In one of the institutions where I served, small liberal arts college, we instituted a youth or a young philanthropy council where we had a foundation that made an ongoing grant to give away, and these students were empowered to do that. But I added a requirement to that. They had to be donors themselves, even if it was coffee money. They had to be participants in the process themselves. It's amazing what that does, you see. Now, this also assumes that students are having a reasonably positive experience. There's nothing that undercuts fundraising than for someone to have a negative experience. And in higher ed, you don't have a lot of control over that. As a fundraiser, you can do all the right things, and if they've been really alienated by a faculty member or a bureaucrat or somebody else, it's tough to turn them around. But barring that, you want to get them involved before they ever leave school. So they had this whole idea of these senior giving projects. And then the key, of course, is relentless, continual follow-up. And, of course, asking them questions. What did you like about your experience? What could we do better? And then, like in my alma mater, it's very well developed in terms of, you know, you're involved in the lives of other incoming students or other activities. It's that sense of being a member of the tribe. But as far as a young person, it starts before they leave, and then you have to. It's that first year or two after they leave school that you really have to keep close contact on them, even if they're going to even if they're going to graduate school or someplace else where, yeah, you know, giving may be, you know, a really minor thing. Fine, wonderful. Stay with it. Keep with it over time. That's the difference.
Great. I love those ideas. That was great. Well, we've got a question from Kate, and it's a question that we usually get at least once on all of our webinars that we do once a week. And it's one of my favorite questions, and I'm really excited to hear what your answer is, Larry. And she's asking about buy-in. Yeah.
This is I can step my foot into this one fast. All right.
No, you'll be great. She's asking about buy-in. So how do you convince management and your board and all those folks that this stuff is important, that all the things they're saying are important, that, you know, fundraising should be about the long term, and what advice would you have for Kate, who's trying to get buy-in from leadership on this kind of stuff?
Well, in terms of practical advice, let's take it two levels. In terms of basic philosophical approach, in order to be successful, these individuals you just mentioned all have to be active donors themselves. They have to be. Now, I mean, for those of you out there that are poker players, you know that to sit at the table with the game, you must participate in the blind. You have to, or else you're not there. You don't get dealt a hand. I'm sorry. And you see, and this is where the peer pressure can be very, very useful, say on a governing board, where it's something that we do here. And that doesn't mean that everyone gives at a deep pocket level. People give at a commensurate level. And that's why I'm not an advocate for minimums and this kind of thing. But it's really at a commensurate level, because groups seek their own natural equilibrium. But that's the goal, is that everyone, let's say on a governing board, or everyone on the staff, or as close to 100% as you can get, then they're giving at a level that makes sense for them and their situation. And other people know that. You don't have to go around with a sandwich board on your back. Other people know it. It's just there. Now, how do you get there if you're not there now? All right. Well, that can become touchy, and it's something that doesn't happen immediately. And since fundraising is an inside-out, top-down kind of enterprise, the best way to do that would be to begin to get a core group of 2 or 3 of your board members to really get this idea and embrace it and begin to work with it on the board and change the culture of the board over time. And if you're serious about it and you're consistent with it, people that have been enlisted on your board without that being a part of the social contract will begin to self-select off.
Right.
And once they do that, then the key is that when new people are enlisted, that active, ongoing financial contributions are a part of the job description, and you don't vary from that. That's just a non-negotiable. It's not that you're in your face with them. It's just that you don't negotiate that. Then you're going to gradually turn that wheel to where you need to be. And there's nothing more powerful to a donor than knowing that the leadership is 100% committed with their own funds, and that staff give at a high level. Not that staff at a nonprofit make a lot of money. That's not the point. The point is they believe enough in the organization to say, hey, even for a small amount, I'm in. I belong. That's very, very powerful.
Great. Well, we've probably got about time for a couple more questions. I know we're approaching the 2 o'clock Eastern hour, but we'll try to get to as many as we can in the next 5 or 10 minutes or so. So we've got a question from Doug, and he's aware of how powerful social media and email can be for fundraising. But he's wondering if direct mail still plays a major part. So, Larry, what are your thoughts on using direct mail, like postcards and newsletters for communicating some of these things? Is it still useful? Is it something that people should maybe not focus on as much? What do you think about direct mail?
Well, let's go back to looking at his donor base.
Mm-hmm.
I would say the first thing I would find out is who the donor base is, what their demography is, what is it that they want. For instance, this person over 65 is generally going to want something in the mail. They're going to want something hand addressed. The young man or young woman who's 23 or 24 probably wants it in a text message on their smartphone.
Yep.
And so the key is it becomes what does your donor want, which means, let's go back again to the whole premise of our webinar today, is that you have to treat different donors differently. There is no one size fits all. So to answer the question, yes, there's a place for direct mail. Yes, there's a place for text giving. Yes, there's a place for social media. It all plays a role in a complete package, and how it plays in your particular program has a lot to do with who your donors are, or the kind of people you're trying to attract.
Great. Well, we've got a question here from Dale about your 80-20 rule, and he wrote a lot here, and I'm just going to kind of get to the meat of his question. And he's wondering about that 20%. How do you transition the 80% into that active 20% or so? What are some strategies you would share with Dale, with people into the other side of that?
Well, I'm not sure I understand the question. Here's where I'm going with that. When I say 80-20, what I mean is that almost without fail, when you look at gifts that are given in any program, and you have to look at it in terms of the total program, that 80% of the total that you're receiving in any given time period is coming from roughly 20% of the sources that are giving.
Right.
That will vary depending on the kind of organization that you have. I mean, for instance, arts organizations tend to be more narrow. They tend to have a higher percentage with fewer people. Community-based, youth-based, social service types of organizations, that is a little flatter. It could be 30, 70, or even more. So what I say there is that's a given. That's going to happen. The question is, so it goes back to treating different donors differently, so that you want to maintain and maximize what's going to come your way. The 80-20 is just what comes in naturally. That's what's going to be there, even if you try to contrive it.
So what about those? Yeah, I think that works. And I would just add a follow-up question. For that 80% that's not giving as much as that
giving a smaller amount.
Yeah. Do you think that people necessarily have to spend a lot of time trying to get them to give more, or do you think the time should be better spent on maybe retaining that 20% who's giving a little bit more and a little bit more often?
Well, you definitely want a high retention. Absolutely, that is key for scalability, because people do what they want to do. All right, and one of the things that's probably the most important thing that's driving that 80-20 is that people have different giving capacities. There's some people who can write a 5-figure check, for which that would be a weekend out. Others, that would be a lifetime of savings. So naturally, you're not going to convince the person for whom 5 figures is an unreachable goal to get anywhere close to that. What you want is people giving at a commensurate level. That's the key, whatever that level is. And what I would assert to you is that very, very few organizations ever get close to that with the bulk of the people who make gifts to them, whatever that is.
Right. Yep.
But even given that, if they were to approach that, I think you'd still see some formula of this 80-20 operating, simply because of income distribution.
Right. Well, we've got about 5 minutes left. I think we'll do one more question and wrap things up. I know we didn't get to all the questions, and I feel like Larry and I could probably talk about this stuff all day, but I do want to keep it to an hour just to be respectful of everyone's time. So why don't we end it with one last question, and it comes from Ginny, and she's got an all-volunteer organization that's just getting started. So, Larry, I'm wondering what advice you would give to an organization who is just getting started with all of this. What are some tips you would have to, have them dip their toes into this water and get some things going that you've suggested here?
Well, and her name is Jenny?
Ginny, yes.
Jenny. Well, Jenny, I think you're in a very enviable position, and I say that in all sincerity, because of several things. First of all, volunteers are the lifeblood of philanthropy. The most effective fundraising, if it's done appropriately, are done through volunteers. All the professional stuff aside, I can tell you that they are the lifeblood. So having volunteers who are well motivated and who believe in the cause or whatever it is you're doing is wonderful. The fact that you're just starting, you don't have any bad habits to undo. And that's often more difficult. I mean, it's like, I don't play golf very well, and I've had lessons a couple of times. It doesn't seem to have taken on me. But, one of my golf pros said, well, Larry, the good news is you don't have any bad habits to undo. Well, it's the same way in this. You don't have any bad habits. So the key for you is going to be to start off in the right way, knowing where the boundaries are, and that would be with your governing board, the people who believe in this cause, who want to make it happen, and have them do the right things all the time and begin to give of their time. You see, a lot of people think that fundraisers are like bounty hunters or gunslingers. The most effective ones are much more like program managers. They're staffing a lot of different people who have a place in the whole process. For instance, one of the reasons you have a board is for them to advocate the organization to everyone they know. Builds those network, you see. And, people kind of think fundraising is all about asking. Well, the asking is a very small part of it, actually. So for you just starting out, I'd make sure that you have a board that's committed, both in terms of time and money to the extent of their ability, and that they are willing to start building their network of people that they know that they can share what a wonderful, great organization this is, and they want them to be a part of that. That's the place to begin. It's an inside-out thing. It's, principle 5 of the 8 principles is work from the inside out. That's what you want to do. You don't have to reach everybody out there that would ever support you. Start with the people that you know support you and begin working out slowly.
Great. Well, Larry, this was just a lot of fun for you to be here and have this lively discussion with us. So thanks again for joining us. I know we didn't get to all the questions, but maybe in the time remaining you could let folks know how they can learn more about you, maybe how they can contact you. I know you're a Twitter guy, so maybe some folks can send some questions over via Twitter. But why don't you? Yeah.
Go ahead. Well, I'm on Twitter, Larry_C_Johnson. I'm on LinkedIn. You can go to my website, which is the8principles.com, and that's the word 8 spelled out. The book is available in any number of formats, any number of places. Amazon, iBooks, it's available on the website, it's in Barnes & Noble. I even discovered that Walmart's selling it. There's one for you.
Nice.
Yeah, that's a surprise. So, it's electronic or hardbound. You can reach me via email. It's simply larry@the8principles.com. And if Steve, if you'll supply me with a log of unanswered questions and emails, I'll try to respond to those that we're not able to respond during the
Yeah, definitely. And for those of you who have joined us, when this webinar ends, you'll be presented with a little survey form. So feel free to send any questions over during that through that form, and I'll be sure to send those over to Larry. And please do share your feedback with us. I do these webinars once a week here at Bloomerang. Always looking for feedback and suggestions. You won't hurt my feelings at all. I don't think you'll hurt Larry's feelings if you share some feedback with us. So do fill out that form, and we'll be back in touch with you a little later on. And this afternoon I will be sending out the slides and a recording of this presentation, so look for that to hit your email inbox a little later today. And just in the few seconds we have remaining, we've got some really great webinars scheduled for December. These are all free. They're all totally educational. So we've got 3 planned. We're going to be talking about NCOA and some mail merges and email and all those great things. We'll be talking about content marketing the week after, and then we're going to have Jeff Jowdy who's going to join us and talk a little bit about planned giving plans. So visit our website, register for those for sure. You don't want to miss any of those because they'll be great presentations. So I want to send just a final thanks to Larry Johnson. Larry, thanks for joining us again. A really fantastic conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did.
It was my pleasure, and I wish a happy Thanksgiving to everyone out there.
Yeah, happy Thanksgiving. Well, thanks to everyone who joined us, and have a great rest of your day. Have a great Thanksgiving holiday and weekend. Bye now.
Bye-bye.